Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today we're going to be checking out a character from Dune who might not be the, like, quote-unquote main hero or the chosen one or anything like that, but he's someone whose choices really echo throughout the whole story, and I'm talking about Duke Leto Atreides.
Yeah, and you know what makes Leto's story so interesting to me, at least, is that he's dealing with this tension between staying true to his values in a world where it seems like power comes at a serious cost.
Yeah, it's like his story goes way beyond just a typical science fiction plot.
Yeah, it really gets into these big questions about leadership and ethics and sacrifice, stuff that we all struggle with in our own lives.
Exactly. Like, imagine inheriting this name that's synonymous with, like, honor and justice, right? You're
Yeah.
ruling a peaceful planet, and then, bam, you're suddenly thrown into this world of political schemes and rivals who will stop at nothing to get what they want. That's Duke Leto's reality. He's from House Atreides, this ancient lineage going all the way back to figures like Agamemnon,
Oh, yeah, known for their strong sense of duty and justice.
right? And it's interesting when you contrast their home planet Caladan with Arrakis, the main setting of Dune.
Oh yeah, Caladan is described as this lush and prosperous place, totally different from the harsh desert landscape of Arrakis.
But we know Arrakis has the most valuable substance in the universe, that spice melange.
Yeah, the spice is like the key to interstellar travel.
It's like the oil of the Dune universe.
Pretty much, which makes Arrakis the most important planet, strategically speaking, in the galaxy. And that's where things get really interesting. The Emperor, instead of rewarding Leto for his loyalty, hands him control of Arrakis, knowing that it's a total trap set by House Harkonnen.
Those are their enemies, right?
Yeah, the Harkonnens, they're known for being cruel and exploitative. Basically the opposite of everything House Atreides stands for.
So the Emperor is basically throwing Leto to the wolves.
Yeah, and they ruled Arrakis before Leto, and their methods were brutal to say the least. They didn't care about the native Fremen. People just saw them as tools to get more spice.
Wow. So knowing all this, Leto still accepts the challenge.
I know, right?
Knowing how dangerous Arrakis is, why would he willingly walk into this trap? Was it just a sense of duty to the Emperor, or maybe ambition, or was there something more going on?
That's the question that really defines Leto's character, and it's something the source material really digs into. On the surface, it might seem like it's all about honor versus ambition, but when you look closer, you see how complicated his situation really is.
He's not just a pawn in some political game.
No, he's a leader trying to balance the weight of his family's legacy. The safety of his people and his own sense of right and wrong.
It's like he's trying to play chess while everyone else is playing poker and not playing fair.
Exactly. And it's this constant inner conflict that makes him such a compelling character.
So is that what makes him such a good leader?
Well, that's part of it, but it's also what makes him vulnerable. One example that shows his decision to bring his whole household to Arrakis, his advisors told him it was too risky, that it would leave them open to attack. But Leto believed in leading by example, in sharing the risks with his people.
It's a bold move, especially in the world of Dune, where everyone's always scheming and trying to stab each other in the back.
Right, and it's interesting to think about, was he naive to think he could operate with honor in such a cutthroat environment?
I mean, he's going up against the Harkonnens. They're ruthless.
And that's the million-dollar question, right? The source material leaves it open to interpretation. You could argue that his refusal to stoop to the level of his enemies, his belief in doing the right thing, led to his downfall.
But you could also say that his integrity was his greatest strength, a way to inspire loyalty in his followers.
Exactly, and maybe even a way to win over some of his enemies.
It's almost like he's trying to change the rules of the game.
Yeah, the source material highlights how Leto actually had options.
Yeah.
He could have played the Harkonnen way, used their brutal tactics, but he just rejects that approach.
Instead, he tries to find a different path.
Yeah, a more honorable one. And that's where the Fremen come, in the native people of Arrakis. He sees their strength, their connection to the planet.
And instead of exploiting them,
He wants to understand them to gain their trust. He even starts adopting some of their customs.
wow, that's pretty radical for a leader in the Dune universe.
These are the people who have been mistreated and ignored for generations by the same powers that Leto has to deal with.
So is he trying to bring a little bit of Caladan to Arrakis?
In a way, yeah. Remember how we talked about how Caladan was a world where art and music and intellectual pursuits were valued? Well, that really shaped his worldview, his belief in diplomacy and understanding.
That's a noble goal.
Yeah.
But is it realistic? I mean, Arrakis is all about survival of the fittest. The Fremen themselves are known for being fiercely independent.
And that really sets the stage for this central tension in Leto's story. Can his ideals survive the harsh realities of Arrakis? Can he really walk the path of honor in a world where every step seems to demand compromise?
So that brings us to like one of the biggest betrayals in Dune, the betrayal by his own physician, Dr. Yu.
Oh man, yeah, this is a guy who swore to protect the Atreides family, someone Leto considered a close friend.
And yet he becomes the instrument of their destruction.
And it's such a gut punch because it shows the tragic consequences of Leto's unwavering faith in others.
So was it just pure evil on Yu's part?
Well, actually, the source material reveals that Yu was forced into this betrayal. The Harkonnens had captured his wife and were torturing her.
Right.
He had to choose between betraying Leto or watching his wife suffer a horrible fate.
So it was an act of desperation then, a twisted kind of love and sacrifice.
Exactly, and it raises this huge question about leadership. How do you lead when the people you trust most can be manipulated into doing terrible things? How can you maintain trust when the stakes are so high?
That's a dilemma that goes way beyond Dune. We all face situations where our loyalty and trust are tested.
For sure. And Yu's betrayal isn't just a plot point, it reflects how complicated human relationships can be and the impossible choices we sometimes face.
It really makes you think about the sacrifices we're willing to make for the people we love and how those choices can affect others in ways we can't predict.
Absolutely. And, Yue's betrayal is what sets off this whole chain of events that leads to Leto's capture and his final act of defiance.
Oh man, that scene where he's captured, he knows he's doomed, but he still tries to take down Baron Harkonnen with him.
That poison capsule, right? Such a Leto move.
It shows so much about his character, even facing death. He's still fighting for his family and his values.
Right, even in defeat, his spirit is unbroken, and that has a huge impact on his son, Paul.
And that's where Leto's story takes on a whole new meaning. His death isn't the end.
It's the beginning of something much bigger.
His legacy lives on through Paul, and Paul's actions will shape the fate of Arrakis and the whole Dune universe.
And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive, exploring how Leto's choices, his sacrifices, and his belief in honor all influence Paul's journey and ultimately the fate of Arrakis.
It's mind-blowing to think that even in defeat, Leto's impact is so huge. His story really shows that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that happen long after we're gone. So make sure to tune in for the next part of our deep dive into the legacy of Duke Leto Atreides. Welcome back to our deep dive into Dune and the legacy of Duke Leto Atreides. We left off talking about Leto's tragic end and how even in defeat, his actions really shape the rest of the story.
It's interesting because his death isn't just like some dramatic turning point. It actually sets the stage for Paul's transformation, his son.
Right.
It kind of forces Paul to confront the harsh reality of Arrakis and deal with the same questions about power and leadership that his father struggled with.
It's like Leto passes the torch to Paul, not just of leadership, but of these ethical dilemmas too.
Exactly. It's like this idea of inherited responsibility, Leto's teachings, his example of how to lead with integrity, they become the foundation for how Paul develops his own leadership style.
But Paul also has to face the reality of Arrakis, right? The threat from the Harkonnens and all the political scheming.
Absolutely. He can't just ignore those things. He's got to find a way to balance his father's ideals with the need to survive in this brutal world.
So it's almost like Paul gets to see a case study of his father's life.
Yeah, he sees the successes and failures, and he learns about the cost of honor and the compromises you sometimes have to make to stay alive.
So in a way, Leto wins even though he doesn't live to see it. His ideals live on through Paul and help shape the fate of Arrakis.
Yeah, it's a complex legacy. The source material talks about this idea of the cost of honor and how Leto's commitment to his values might have contributed to his downfall.
But didn't his integrity also help him gain allies like the Fremen? He treated them with respect and wanted to work with them, not exploit them.
That's a great point. His relationship with the Fremen is one of the most interesting parts of his story. It sets him apart from the other houses who just saw the Fremen as a way to get more spice.
And his actions definitely influence how Paul interacts with the Fremen later on.
For sure. It's like Leto planted the seeds for a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect and understanding.
And Paul tries to continue building on that relationship.
Yeah, and, Leto's decision to embrace the Fremen was a huge departure from how the Imperium usually operated. He saw their strength, their resilience, and thought they could be powerful allies.
Instead of just another group to exploit.
Exactly. And it's interesting to think about how Leto's upbringing on Caladan influenced his approach.
Oh yeah, Caladan was so different from Arrakis.
Right. It was a place that valued art and culture and diplomacy. Leto brought those values with him to Arrakis, almost like he was trying to create a little piece of Caladan in this harsh desert world.
It makes you wonder what would have happened if he had lived out. Would he have been able to unite the Atreides and the Fremen and create a more just society on Arrakis?
It's a question that really makes you think, what if things had gone differently?
It also makes you think about how powerful leadership can be, how one person's choices can have these ripple effects that last for generations.
Absolutely. Leto's story reminds us that leadership isn't just about having power. It's about making choices that reflect your values and your vision for the world.
Even when those choices are hard.
Exactly. And it's not just the big decisions that matter. Even small acts of kindness and compassion can have a huge impact.
Like how Leto chose to treat the Fremen with respect.
Right, that one decision set off a whole chain of events that changed the course of history on Arrakis.
It's a reminder that even in a world as messed up as Dune, where it seems like everyone's just out for themselves, there's still hope for change.
And that change can start with just one person choosing to do the right thing.
Even when it's hard, even when they're surrounded by people who are doing the opposite.
Yeah, Leto's story shows that even in the face of overwhelming odds, you can still hold on to your values and fight for what you believe in.
He might not have won the battle against the Harkonnens, but his spirit and his ideals lived on through Paul and through the changes he set in motion.
And his story continues to inspire people today. It reminds us that leadership isn't just about power, it's about making choices that reflect our values, even when it's tough.
Leto's story really challenges us to think about what kind of leaders we want to be. What kind of world do we want to live in?
Do we want to be part of the problem or part of the solution?
It's a powerful question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we'll keep exploring in the final part of our deep dive into the legacy of Duke Leto Atreides.
We'll look at the lasting impact of his choices and how his story continues to speak to us about leadership ethics and staying true to yourself in a world that often rewards the opposite.
So stay tuned as we uncover the final layers of Duke Leto's story and the profound things he teaches us about leadership and the power of doing what's right, even when it seems impossible. All right, so we're back and still digging into the legacy of Duke Leto Atreides. It's kind of wild how his story still has so much to say, even though, his time on Arrakis was so short. We've been talking about his choices, his honor, and the way he influenced both Paul and the Fremen. But I'm curious, how does all this fit into the bigger picture of Dune?
Well, that's where things get even more fascinating. You see, Leto's story isn't just about one man's struggle. It's really about this clash between old and new ways of thinking. This battle between tradition and the need to change. He represents this old school way of doing things, this belief in honor and justice that just keeps bumping up against the reality of the Dune universe.
So it's like he's a symbol of time that's passed, like a reminder of when leaders cared about more than just power.
Exactly. And you could even see his death as a kind of warning, like Frank Herbert is saying, this is what happens when you try to play by the old rules in a world that's changed.
So didn't his values kind of live on through Paul? Doesn't that mean his approach wasn't a total failure?
That's the thing about Leto's legacy. It's full of contradictions. His ideals definitely shaped Paul, but Paul also saw the downsides of his father's approach, He saw how that unwavering honor could make you vulnerable.
So Paul kind of combined the best of both worlds. He took what worked from his father's teachings, but also adapted to the brutality of Arrakis.
Exactly. He learned how to play the game of power, but without losing sight of those core values.
So he was able to take his father's legacy and make something new out of it, something that could actually survive on Arrakis.
Right, and that's what makes Leto's story so powerful. It's not just a sad ending, it's a catalyst for change. It makes us think about the compromises we have to make in our own lives, the lines we're willing to cross to get what we want.
Yeah, can you really hold on to your values in a world that seems to reward people who are ruthless and manipulative?
That's the question Leto's story leaves us with, and there's no easy answer. But by looking at his struggles, his wins and losses, we get a better understanding of what it means to be a leader and how tricky it can be to balance power with morality.
It's like Leto's story is this thought experiment that forces us to look at our own beliefs about leadership. If we were in his shoes, facing those same impossible choices, what would we do? Would we sacrifice our principles to stay alive? Or would we stick to our guns, even if it meant risking everything?
And that's what's so great about books like Dune. They let us explore these tough questions without any real-world consequences. We can look at different perspectives and challenge our own ideas.
Leto's story might not give us all the answers, but it gives us a lot to chew on. It reminds us that leadership isn't about following some rule book. It's about making choices even when they're hard choices, that reflect who we are and what we believe in.
And those choices, they always have consequences. Sometimes consequences we don't even see coming. They shape our lives and the lives of everyone around us.
So Leto might not have been the hero of Dune, but his story shows that even when you lose your choices can still echo through time.
He pushes us to think hard about what it means to be a leader, the compromises we're willing to make, and the legacy we leave behind.
Well, it's been awesome diving deep into the legacy of Duke Leto Atreides with you all. He might not be the most famous character in Dune, but his story reminds us that even in defeat, our choices can have a huge impact. And he makes us really think about the kind of leaders we want to be and the world we want to live in.
He's this perfect example of the struggle between idealism and pragmatism, you know? He shows us that even in a place as brutal as Arrakis, there's still room for hope and change, as long as we're willing to be brave and act with integrity and compassion.
So as we wrap things up, here's a final thought for everyone. What kind of leader would you be if you were in Leto's shoes? And what kind of world do you want to build? Because ultimately our choices matter, even when the odds are stacked against us. We have the power to shape the future, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Dune and the legacy of Duke Leto Atreides. We hope this exploration has sparked some new ideas and inspired you to keep thinking about the amazing themes that Frank Herbert created in this incredible book.